So I'd like to welcome everybody today. My name is David Wood. I'm the Special Projects Manager for Early Music America. And today we're having a conversation about the performance and programming and presentation of medieval music to modern audiences in our contemporary world. We're very happy to have several different ensembles and educational backgrounds and different performing styles and interpretations represented in this conversation today. And we'll be talking a little bit about a lot of different things in the next 45 minutes or so. And so I'm going to have each of the members of the panel here introduce themselves and talk a little bit just about sort of their background in medieval music and the ensembles or organizations or whatever that they're representing in this conversation today.
All right, I'm Sean Ricketts, and my colleague,
I'm Tracy Howard. Tracy Howard.
And we met and started making medieval music together when we were doctoral students in historical performance practice at Case Western Reserve University, studying with Deborah Nagy, who of course works with Scott Metcalf in a variety, all wonderful platforms, with Blade Elise and Blue Heron and Tenet and beyond. So we started making medieval music then, and we really, we started an ensemble called Alchemy that our focus is medieval music, although we've started straying into other centuries like the current century. And we make music together in New York and across America. And this year, for the past year, we've been co-directors of the Collegium, the medieval music ensemble at Fordham University in New York.
That is exactly right. Sean and I do many things collaboratively. Our ensemble is very collaborative between the five of us, and we as a duo do both based in New York City and living 10 minutes away from each other are perhaps even more joined. So I have nothing to add except
I'm Scott Metcalf here, I guess, in my capacity as the director of Blue Heron, which is a vocal ensemble based in Boston that does mostly 15th and 16th century music. We have made some excursions later into actually as far as the 21st century, and reached a fair distance back as well to plain chant and paratin, and we now do a lot of 14th century music as well, largely in collaboration with Deborah Nagy and Lady Elise. Deborah and I are both was both started out as Baroque instrumentalists. She's a Baroque oboe player, and I'm a Baroque violinist by trade originally, and we've been working together in Baroque situations for 20 years, I think. We met maybe about 20 years ago, and have been friends and colleagues ever since. But we've discovered a mutual love of 15th and 14th century music, and I've been really fortunate to work with Deborah quite a number of times. So we have a sort of ongoing project collaboration between Blue Heron and Lady Elise in Boston and Cleveland. And so I'd say I'm a violinist who backed up and backed up and backed up.
So I'm Angelo Mariani, and I direct the Collegium Musicum at Texas Tech University, which, let's see, we got that started about 2001. So I've been there directing that for about, wow, 19 years at this point. Kind of came to medieval music sort of through the back door of folk and traditional music. Studied with Tom Binkley at Indiana University, and with Benjamin Bagby and Barbara Thornton in Vancouver. Co-founded a medieval ensemble called Ultramar, and we did, I think about 7 CDs, and the Dorian label toured various places. Also, quite a while ago, I started the early music radio program Harmonia, and have been hosting that, gosh, since like 1991, and still hosting that. So that's about it. Been doing medieval music for quite a while.
I might put in at this point that since Angie mentioned Ben Bagby and Barbara Thornton and Tom Binkley, and you know, that we are all of us that I see here are sort of a next generation of medieval musicians who inherited a lot of knowledge and practice and passion from people who went before us, many of whom, as it turns out, were Americans who studied in Europe and either came back or didn't. But we've had also a relationship with Ben Bagby. He's certainly, they're members of Blue Heron who've sung with him for many, many years. And we've had the pleasure of every now and again collaborating with him a little bit. You know, I wish that would happen all the time. We kept hoping that he was going to move to Boston, but so
Yeah.
the fingers are still crossed.
Well, you know, that brings up a really good point. So, Angie, as you were a student of Thomas Binkley, who was one of these Americans who was you know, teaching other Americans and young Americans how to present this music, what are some of the lessons that you learned from him that you also now try to instill in your students, in your listeners, in audiences that you're presenting to?
Wow, well, that could be quite a lengthy answer, so it's be a little bit difficult to sum it up. One of the things I loved about Tom Binkley's approach was that he was not afraid to take chances, and he wasn't afraid to have an idea and follow that idea, and if he followed it to a place that maybe was a little bit off the beaten track, he wasn't afraid of that. But at the same time, he thought very deeply about all of the performance decisions that he made, and he taught us to do the same thing. And the other thing that I think is really important, and I wouldn't say necessarily that I heard him say it in these words, but one of the big things that I took away from him is that is this idea of embracing the performance of medieval music as an inquiry into processes of music making, rather than, you know, this idea of recreating something exactly. I can remember once, you know, when he was coaching a bunch of us and we were struggling with something, and he said, listen, I'm not trying to get you to give me the most historically accurate version of this piece that could possibly exist. I'm asking you to play the best one. And, you know, that would kind of set us back a little bit when he'd say things like that. What do you mean you don't want us to do the most historically accurate, you know? But he would say these provocative things that would make us think. And teaching you to think in different ways, I think, and always encouraging you to ask questions. He'd say, never believe anything. You know, it was just really valuable.
If I may, I'd love to follow up on that a little bit. Sean and I have a colleague, Andrew Alban, who recently gave me a string of words that I thought was beautifully put. He said, one of the things that I think draw people to the medieval period in general and to medieval music and art is that the unknown presents an invitation to be creative, something along those lines. And I think that's true. And I think that is part of why many of us are drawn to this period. There's many, many reasons to be drawn to it, right? One of the things I've noticed in being a second generation, or however you want to define the generation, second generation removed by several hundred years, is that we do now have interpretations that have been recorded, wonderful ensembles who've made decisions, and it seems like those Thomas's words are even more important, I would say, because I feel like in our world where we always talk about how early music is different than music of today, often because there isn't as much notated. And yet it seems that I find people who want to notate medieval music in their minds, in their performance, as much as they can. And of course, you know, looking into tools that we have, these processes are, well, they're tools. They're tools to create a living performance. But it has been interesting, and I don't have a conclusion to this, except just to notice that I've noticed more and more, I don't want to call it an ossification, but like an instinct for people to do medieval music right, which I think comes from a really wonderful place, saying, I want to take this, I want to take it seriously. But at the same time, I think it can, when you're just worried about doing it right, you might not ask as many questions as you would if you were thinking about processes or thinking about, well, now that I maybe have a glimmer of an idea of a processes, what do I have to say as part of this picture as well?
Well, and I think that's another something that I'd like each of you to sort of take a moment and think, and then whoever would like to answer first can do that. But if you could think of a particular challenge in a piece that you were preparing, or maybe it was for a program as a whole, where was a place that you felt like you had to use creativity to sort of fill in some of those holes for either lack of, you know, writing about the particular piece, or lack of music, or things like that? What are some examples of how you had to, within your groups, be creative and move beyond what you sort of felt you knew as a concrete thing, and move into the unknown space?
You know, Scott, I have to say, I'd be really curious about your answer to this. One as a VL player, but also as somebody who does a lot of polyphony in terms of, you know, and who's extremely informed about history and scholarship. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I could take a stab at it. I might preface it by saying that we should be careful to distinguish all the different kinds of styles and eras we're talking about. I mean, medieval music that's
right.
Like playing music.
Absolutely.
Right. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of years of repertoire. And there aren't few of us, there are few people who actually do all the way from plain chant through troubadours and do this and that and get up into polyphony and do equally convincingly. I certainly wouldn't aspire to cover anything like that amount of repertoire. And I do later stuff as well, of course. It's an interesting question, Tracy, about like what I feel like in music, when we get into actually performing situations, the actual process of preparing the music for performance is a simply imaginative one that goes on collaboratively with the people in the room and working out the solutions that work for those people once we've got to that point. You know, someone brings an idea about how to make a line work, and someone brings some information about language or pronunciation, and we're all trying to decide about what notes we should actually do. I mean, these questions arrive in polyphony too, right? We don't, the exact pitch content is sometimes a little bit open to question as terms of flats or sharps. But I don't really see medieval, I don't see any period of music as being distinct from any other in the need for the application of musical imagination and emotional sympathy at every point of the process and into the performance. Some of the decisions about what instruments are we going to use, what voice types are we going to use, what pitch might we sing this at, how might we score it, those things become more and more challenging to sort out every century back. This speaks to my direct experience, I think, in my life as, I'm a violinist. Okay, I'm really interested in Baroque violin. Oh, so I can find out a lot about 18th century music. Well, I really like 17th century music. Okay, you can find out a lot about that too. It begins to get a little less clear. 16th century, well, there's a lot less written down explicitly. And then by the time you get to the 15th century, I don't think I even know what voice types to use in certain pieces a lot of the time. And 14th century, I mean, we're doing a song. Is it for singers? For instruments? What do the singers do if they're singers? I've now been thinking about some of these questions for 2 decades, and I don't feel any closer to answers than I did when I first started. I know a lot more about what are plausible answers, but until we find a lot more evidence, which does not seem likely to happen, I think a lot of these questions are just going to remain open. But it doesn't mean one can't keep probing all the evidence that we have and re-examining things that we read 15 years ago and forgot, and think about them again and try to figure out more plausible answers, because those will suggest new musical ideas that we might not have thought of otherwise.
Yeah, I loved what you said about every musical experience being a process that demands creativity and imagination, and depending on those specific people. I think that that's something that I've discovered. Our process, and there's a lot of different ways to have a group. Our group is musically a democracy, so no one person is in charge of anything when we're in the rehearsal room. I generally am the person who keeps track of, like, hey guys, it's time to take a break, you know? But in terms of sharing musical ideas, we all really have equal voices. And one thing that we've learned as the 5 and sometimes the 6 of us have worked together over the last 7 years is whatever, you know, generally we'll assign, if someone's singing a solo piece, they will be in charge of having some ideas of instrumentation and some directions. But if I've learned anything, it's that whatever you thought was going to happen, probably something far exceeding your wildest dreams and imagination will happen in the rehearsal room. And trying to exert too much control will only yield, well, first of all, in our group, probably you won't win. So you might as well just not fight it. If somebody else has an idea that's the opposite of your idea, probably try it out. It'll change everything for the better in a way that you could never have imagined. And this was, for me, medieval music was the space in which I learned to like group projects. Like, I was a person who never understood the joy of a group project until being in a space that demands creativity. Because there's so much information we don't know, you learn to respect and delight in the choices of other people that are like, oh, I would never, ever, ever have thought to do that. And it sounds so great. And it brought out so much meaning. Like and of course, everybody has their own ideas. And so any 5 people you get in a room, you'll come up with something different, and you'll have a different product, and it'll be equally good. And that's one thing that I think is so joyful about working with this repertoire, is that there's so much space for that.
So, Angie, may I ask you a question as someone who has also been working with students who I'm guessing most of them have probably not performed a lot of medieval music before they become a part of your ensemble. So when they sit down in a rehearsal or a stand-up or whatever they're doing, and you hand them a piece of music, or you're getting ready to teach them a line, or however you're preparing for it, how do you present that to them? Because in my experience working with students, you know, I hand them something and it's a melody, and that's the piece, and they think, well, how long is this going to take us? It's not going to take us long to learn. This is all this is. So how do you go from there, from starting something that seems like it may not hold very much, but then how do you proceed?
Well, a lot of it depends on the repertoire. You know, there's such a lot of difference between, you know, even something as simple as, you know, this is monophonic versus polyphonic. There's going to be a different kind of answer to that. One of the things that often comes up with students is that they're a little bit afraid about medieval music. You know, it's sort of on their musical map. It's the here be dragons place, you know, and a little bit, you know, is she going to make us read some of this scary notation or what, you know? So a lot of times what I start with is this notion of, okay, here's what's on this page. You know, this is what we get. You know, this is what was in the manuscript. What's not there? What's not there? Let's talk for a minute about what's not there. Because when we talk about what isn't there, and you know, and I'm really right now talking about pretty early stuff. I mean, if I were approaching 13th century or 14th century, you know, what isn't there? So that tells us what we're gonna have to provide. And then I'll say, you know, what else isn't there? What don't we know? What do we need to know? And I have to tell you, I'm just quoting Tom directly here. What do I need to know to be able to play this music? Do I need to know how to pronounce, you know, Old Occitan? Do I need to know about what mode this is in? If I'm going to play an instrument and I've got a singer and there's absolutely nothing written down for me to play, what am I going to have to come up with? So you're just kind of presenting the situation, kind of presenting this is the playing field. This is what we have to play with. So I would say the very, very first step would be something like that.
How about the rest of you? How do you approach it from that beginning? You know, the germ of an idea that maybe turns into what Sean, what you were talking about, eventually in the rehearsal situation blooms into something else. But how do you find that first gem? I guess this gets to the question, sort of one of the questions that I wanted to talk about in some detail this afternoon was how do you start there and come up with the you know, to begin the process of what's going to be the program and how you're going to present this music? Like where does that first spark come from for you?
For me, going back to a little bit what Scott said before, it always comes from something that I'm interested in. And that sounds so banal. But it's interesting because of course the things you're interested in can be things you know or you don't know. It can be something that you've been exposed to and you want to know more about. Or it can be a really, you know, interesting new idea. What's always funny with that is you think you've had a new idea, right? And then you like go to look about things for it and you find, well, you know, humans, we have some redundancy written into our operating code. So there's often other people who've had that great idea. But I often find that it's a kernel of something, yeah, either something I've heard that I find really compelling, or we're doing a program, Sean and I are going to start working on a program that's a Hildegard program. Who doesn't love Hildegard? I happen to love herbs and foraging, very, you know, 21st century Brooklyn. And so kind of our natural tendency when we program is to kind of put together something that interests us in the here and now with a repertoire that we're interested in exploring. And I find, well, I know for myself, I tend to like to do a little bit of something I know and a little bit of something I don't know, because there is comfort in having kind of a place to start. But then, like, part of the joy is exploring the fringes of the fringe repertoire, I suppose. And yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting from a pedagogical perspective, and especially Tracy and I are pretty young teachers, and we're learning so much from the teaching that we've been doing. We have more experience in kind of a workshop setting where you're dealing with, at least in our experience, we've been dealing with kind of amateur adult early musicians who actually do have some more of a basis for understanding early music and what might be happening. And we love working as a group because we're able to kind of lead them through the process of just making different creative choices. Like, how would we expand? This piece has 5 strokes. Let's try out all the different options that we can think of. And because the 5 of us play so many instruments and we're generally working with a big group, we're able to make all sorts of really exciting noises in the service of kind of exploring many different options. This year, we've had the privilege of getting to work with a fairly new ensemble that includes some undergraduates who are pretty new musicians, as well as being new early musicians. And so it is, the amount of things they don't know is so vast, it is hard to know where to start. For us, the joy of exploration is so exciting, but actually we're finding that we need to provide actually a lot of just context and basis for understanding just basic music history concepts so that they can know what to think about and what might come up. And it's actually been interesting in this time of the coronavirus. So of course we cannot rehearse as an ensemble, but we've been meeting every week to listen to recordings of music that we've worked on this year. I've selected different recordings that I like and talk about what we like and why we like it, and just talk about, can we listen to, do you hear on this strophe of this virelay, what choices? Talk me through the choices that the lute player was making. And to get them just used to understanding that there's so many different choices that can be made. It's especially interesting dealing with monophony and arrangements of monophony because they can be so different. So that's actually been a great tool that circumstances have forced us to explore. But I think that that's actually providing a good basis to start. But yeah, it is a challenge.
I love working with young students also, because they remind you of what you're already taking for granted in a way where, you know, I was just talking about, oh, of course we love to explore, but we tend to already be exploring in a language that we know. And you can forget that and we've created our own language, but you can forget the language that you've created and the assumptions you're making. And one of the fun things about working with students who, you know, are, as Sean said, young musicians as a whole, is they will say things and notice things that I've forgotten that I knew or didn't know. And it's a good way to keep asking yourself, is this still a good idea? Does this still ring true? Is this something that I should evaluate again before passing it along?
Scott, what about you? What are your thoughts?
It occurred to me to make a comment or an observation about some really specific cases having to do with language and underlay. When I and Blue Heron have done a lot of work in French, 15th century French, which is the language that I'm the most familiar with other than English, and have done a lot of work with pronunciation and trying to figure out, oh, how rhymes work and how ends of verses should be said, and how the form of the poetry influences the structure of the song. They're by learning very specific things about French verse, one can learn things very specific about music composed to set French verse and its structure and its rhythm and its melodic orientation. But my cautionary tale to myself has to do with Underlay and Machaut. When I first did some Machaut, which is, I don't know, 15 years ago, so now I've become being a late comer in a way to medieval music. Well, we were faced with some very strange, what appears to be some very strange underlay. And my first instinct, having done a lot of later 15th century music at that point, where often you can't tell much about the underlay, was, well, must be not very specifically written, and maybe we can engineer this a little bit so it fits the melody better, the way it appears to fit the melody better to us. And we'll just change the underlay here. And then, of course, once you start looking at Machaut manuscripts, you begin to realize that unlike later 15th century songs, in the Machaut manuscripts, the underlay is quite specific. It's very, very well organized. And it's often not at all what you would decide to do, not what you would want to do. But you can also see that it's generally consistent from source to source, ones that he himself was involved in supervising. So it means you really need to take seriously what that means. And it changes your idea of the relationship between the rhythm of the verse and the rhythms and melodies in the music, and will dislodge them. But I think it's important. And this is I'm a pretty severe performance practice nerd. I think you just should take that stuff seriously. It's really uncomfortable at first. Just live, that's fine. Be uncomfortable, accept it. Doesn't feel like it makes sense rhythmically? okay, so what? Try it. It's clearly what it says. Let's learn what that means. And then maybe you'll learn ways of being comfortable or expressive options which you never would have tried otherwise. In scoring, Machaut's another interesting question. When talking about virelays, I mean, we hardly know anything about actual performance practice in the 14th century, right? It's a little bit here and a little bit there and a little bit somewhere else. One thing we do know is that virelays for Machaut are basically a monophonic piece that was sung by one singer for other people to dance to, and that they were taken in turns. There's a passage in the Remède de Fortune where they're out singing virelays, and he says, and there wasn't a single instrumentalist anywhere around, or any minstrel or anything like that. And this woman takes her song, and then they say, oh, it's your turn, and I sang this virelay. So that's a performance practice that might make someone very uncomfortable at first. You're going to sing a monophonic virelay without any instrument, any kind of accompaniment for 5 straight minutes, all 5 stanzas of it in the 14th century form. Well, but you should try that. What might you learn?
And singing it for dancers, obviously, playing or singing for dancers changes the way you do that too, right? Yeah.
Of course, and ideally, you'd have a group of dancers to work with, and you would learn what they needed in order to dance a virelay. But I don't know much about dance. I don't think we know much about dance in the 14th century. So that's perhaps even less than we know about music. Is that true?
I would say yes, that's true. Yeah, thinking of what you were saying, Scott, a specific example. So Elena Mullins and I were taught historical dance by Julie Andrzejewski. We did mostly Baroque dance, but we also did some Renaissance dance, and we started working to kind of move it back, which has been fun. But of course, to learn about anything, you have to just start doing it, right? And so one of the things we did is we were playing these estampes, and we said, let's create some choreographies for these estampes, which we did. And there are, well, not to go down too far down a rabbit hole, but there's several strains of thoughts on how they could have been choreographed. And one idea is that the refrain is a refrain. And the other is that, no, they were these big solos, and the refrain kind of gave you an idea of where you were in the piece, but that they were essentially through composed. And we tried both ways, and there is something about what I think of as a historical empathy, so to speak, and this idea that you really try to do something in the way it's presented to you, and it opens up your ability to appreciate other ways of being, which, before I go back to the dance, I think is a challenge for us both as musicians, but also for audience members, right? Because we may get to a point where we say, this is what we're doing, and then the audience might be very uncomfortable with it, or they might find it a fascinating experience that they wouldn't have if we didn't try it ourselves. Maybe we can come back to that. But with the dance, we ended up having the refrain be a repeated, a choreographed refrain that came back. And that was partially just decisions based on what we could do. We found it extremely difficult to compose a thorough composed several minute piece. But it's interesting. And looking back, then we did some actual choreographies that exist from later from Bali and Bastans, and and then we looked back at what we did before, and now we look at it and think, well, those are successful from a creative standpoint. Are they creative from a historical standpoint? Not sure. Would we do it again like that? Maybe not. So there is kind of this I think, push and pull between your present and the past, and then also your past and your present, which make this type of creation fascinating.
And of course, we had played these estampes for many years and kind of crafted what we thought they were doing musically, and we created rehearsal recordings for the dancers. And then once you guys made your choreographies, we really changed how we played them too. So I'm interested to see, I'm sure that when you re-choreograph, we're gonna come up with something totally different. And that's something, going back to what we were talking about, in terms of our creative process that we found, it really takes place over years, where it's, you know, someone will learn how to play a new instrument and then decide, oh, this is the solution to La Seconda Estampille. We just didn't have a doucen before, but we have one now. We have to revamp this whole situation. So that's also one of the joyful things. So yes, it's interacting with your own past and present with the far past and our present all at the same time.
And I'd like to go back just to touch on something, Tracy, that you had brought up, and this is for anyone who wants to talk about this, is to talk about the audience reception side, because, you know, everybody on this call right here clearly finds some sort of joy, something to appreciate about this music, understands something about it, has lived in it for some period of time. But frequently, you know, the music is going to be presented on an early music series that is probably full of mostly Baroque music or some sort of like high Renaissance music, or, you know, or even, you know, Mozart on forte piano or something like that. That's a little bit more usual than what you all will be doing. So what are your experiences with reactions from audiences, things that you've learned about your own ways of presenting because of those audience reactions? Like how are you dealing with that side and trying to put yourselves in the shoes or learning from what your audiences are giving back to you? Anybody want to take that one on? All right, Scott.
Interestingly, I feel that earlier 14th century music, for example, has a very immediate positive effect on the audience. I think that people connect to it actually very, very directly. And I know it's more distant from most people's general musical diet. But I think that if people actually come and just listen with an open mind, they find it really beautiful and engaging pretty much right away. I know that Deborah Nagy in her series for Les Délices, well, we were primarily a French Baroque at A392 ensemble for many years until she started tucking a medieval program in. And that medieval program tends to sell the best of any of her concerts, and people eat it up. So I think that if any music is done with a certain level of skill and with an expressive intensity, that people will love it. And what Tracy said about historical empathy, that touches a really, really important note for me. That we're by doing any kind of old music, and I mean, you know, Fauré or Bartók or anything, we're conversing with human beings from the past who made music when they were alive and bequeathed us these sort of fragments of their culture, which we can then take into our own living cultural life. Right, that's redundant, of course. But so we're in a kind of dialogue with the human beings of the past, and in the same way, you know, when the audience comes and they listen, but what they're listening to are living human beings making living music. So it doesn't matter if it was composed 600 or 800 or 400 or 20 years ago.
Angela, I'm curious about having presented this kind of thing on a radio program and also directed ensembles and also had a ensemble that gave performances professionally. Have you noticed over the years a change in what audiences are excited about, just in general?
Well, I've noticed one thing that they have responded to that they still respond to, and that has to do with a kind of musical storytelling, because I think a lot of people have engaged with all things sort of medieval through the medium of storytelling. And, you know, there's this perception that medieval music is going to be foreign, or, you know, and I mentioned before that some students or music students get a little bit scared by that. And yet, you know, life came to a standstill on Sunday nights for God knows how long because everybody was watching Game of Thrones. And there's this kind of, people love stories. They love to be told stories. And if you can, I know for sure this is true with the radio program, that if you can present a piece of music as part of a story, and that can be a story of a particular kind of music, it can be the story that's being told in the song, it can be the way you present it, the way you sort of craft or curate a program so that one piece leads into another. It could be any number of things that you decide to do, but if you can deliver it in the way that a story is being told, I think audiences respond to that very, very strongly.
So what are some ways that you see innovation in the field of music of the Middle Ages in either recorded ensembles or those who are doing live performances? What are some things that you are seeing or that maybe you're participating in that are, for lack of a better word, you know, are the new fashion of presenting the old music? What are innovations that you're seeing?
This, I think, is happening across all period performance ensembles or just the field in general. But there has been an excitement we've seen for composing for old instruments or composing for early music ensembles. And we've really enjoyed that. It's going back to combining this fascination. I mean, this is part of what we're interested in right now, right? I mean, we talk about this like it's a normal outgrowth, but really the idea that we're interested in historically informed as opposed to authenticity is part of our cultural moment. And so as part of that cultural moment, that dialogue between the present and the past, the present being now, music being improvised now, but also monodies that have been, say, composed for a medieval ensemble is something that we've been doing. And just similarly to teaching students who maybe aren't as familiar with medieval music, working with composers who have all sorts of skills and even a familiarity with medieval music, but perhaps haven't lived with it, create some interesting ideas. It's been fun to do both. Nicolo Seligman, who's part of our ensemble, has written pieces that are in a certain style. So those could be very close to something that you might find in a manuscript. It just so happens that they were inscribed in finale. And then we work with another composer, Eliot Cole, who will write a piece that's perhaps informed by the theme of our program. And he works with us by providing a melody that then we arrange as a team, as we would for most monodies. So that has been one really fun, but also I think that is something that is in vogue right now, and is part of the new things that people are doing to make this seem exciting. It is exciting, but it's part of that moment.
We've been really lucky to get to work with Eliot Cole, who is really engaged with writing music for us, but with the understanding that we will treat it with the same process that we would treat like a Trouvère song from the 13th century. That he will, like a lot of what he wrote for us in 2 programs ago when we worked with him, was just monophony that we arranged together, and he played with us too. So he engaged with the process as a musician and really let us work with his music in the way that we'd work with a composer who hasn't been around for 800 years and wouldn't have any opinions. He would let us kind of work together in a very generous way to see what might happen. And that was such a delight to get to be a part of that melding of old and new. Yeah. and to have the process be part of that too.
David, you're muted.
Oh, sorry. Scott or Angie, anything that that you're seeing that either new approaches that you're taking or that you're seeing other groups take?
Well, I'm enjoying seeing a lot of the, I think an increased amount of mixing theatrical elements into performing, and also of getting a little bit more audience interaction. That's been kind of fun to work with, and I've seen a lot more of that. This notion of devising things as they sort of come along. I have a lot of theater colleagues who are doing a lot of work with devised theater and that sort of thing. But I see that happening not just with early music, but I see that happening with musical performances in general, and this reaching out to involve audiences, or to perform in a venue that might be considered to be an unusual venue, or this sort of thing. I think some of those things are quite exciting.
There's something else that I think is just fun, which to say it out loud, is that the field, I feel, is not homogenous in terms of the ways people are approaching this music. So you may have one group that has a certain set of priorities that, trying to think of words that don't have kind of loaded connotations. We'll just say
Oh, we got a moment of freeze right in excellent. Oh, I think Tracy, you've froze on us at the last minute.
Am I back?
Yes, you're back now. There you go.
My internet connection is unstable. Every time I get that, it makes me giggle. I think that's not the only thing in this room. But yeah, just the idea that there isn't, I like the idea that all of us can sit here and talk and say, these are my priorities, these are my priorities. And that, as Scott said, if you perform something with, what did you say? It was something like commitment, but it was integrity, so to speak, integrity to your values and priorities and the way you're entering this world. It can be compelling. So, I wouldn't want someone listening to this to think, okay, great. So if I'm a medieval ensemble, so I need to be working with composers. It's like, maybe, or maybe you've decided that the most important thing to you is understanding, linguistically how this music works, and that all those things. And I think that is also something that's happening. I think it's related to the fact that we have Spotify and iTunes and a way of seeing a lot of different types of performance practice simultaneously. I think that's fascinating and wonderful.
Yeah, and to just say a little bit more on that, as a singer, one thing I really love is that a lot of medieval music, it's actually a fairly small range vocally compared to, say, singing a Mozart aria. Like, most music can be sung by any human, any voice type, and we haven't at this point established one sound that we think is acceptable to be a singer of medieval music, and I really hope we don't. But right now, what I love hearing is that there are so many different ways to compellingly sing medieval music. It feels so exciting and also accessible in a way that, like, singing a Bach aria, if you're not a soprano, you probably can't sing a Bach soprano aria well. You probably can't sing Sir Fleisa. It's probably not going to sound that great. But probably most people could come up with their compelling rendition of Douce Dame Jolie, which is amazing. And that's something that I hope we continue to expand the variety of sounds that we might hear making this music.
Well, I want to thank you all for giving us your time, for all of the work that you're doing to make the music and excite people about this music and this particular genre, all the centuries that it encompasses. Thank you so much for the way you're reaching out to new audiences and to students. and mostly for being a part of this conversation this afternoon. We'll make sure to have in the description of this particular conversation links to the different ensembles, to publications that members of this discussion have been involved with, and lots of other aspects so people can kind of explore the music that we've been talking about and to get a different, take a different approach maybe because of what they've heard today. So thank you all for being here with us this afternoon.